Great. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Worldviews. Today we have on Greg Koukl. He is the founder and president of Stand to Reason and spent over 30 years launching Christianity. He's spoken on dozens of university campuses, hosted a long-running call-in radio show, and debated figures like Michael Shermer and Deepak Chopra. Greg is the best-selling author and holds a graduate degree in philosophy of religion, ethics, and apologetics, and teaches at Biola University. Greg, thanks for coming on.
Devin, I'm so looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for having me on board.
Greg, I apologize. I think I said a Freudian slip. Did I say Koukl or Koukl during the intro? We just had this to the audience. We just had this conversation about how to pronounce his name, and I said Koukl before just to make sure we had it right. Then he told me a story about how someone pronounced it Koukl. I think I just said Koukl during the intro. Great.
I put that in your head, Devin, by accident because we were just talking about mishaps in the past where people have mispronounced my name in public, and so anyway, yeah, I did notice that, but that's all right. All is forgiven, brother.
Great, thank you. I said it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
grace covers a multitude of transgressions, right?
Amen. Greg, I know you grew up in a Christian home, but you left religion at some point after high school, I believe, and eventually around 1973, you came back to know Christ. The Holy Spirit drew you in, and your brother was a big inspiration during that time because he was very zealous in sharing the gospel with you. And I love hearing about people's testimonies, but I also love hearing not only how people came to Christ, but why they are still Christians today.
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, I was raised Roman Catholic. So in my home, we practiced a Christian religion. But I would not characterize our home as a Christian home in the way that probably most of your listeners would understand that. We did not love Jesus. We were not regenerate. We weren't saved. Nobody was. We were just religious folk following the pattern that we were supposed to follow because we were Roman Catholic. And when I became 18, that's when I was asked quite directly by a friend, "Do you really believe that?" It was a fair question. And because I had been kind of pontificating by rote or out of habit about the legitimacy of my own spiritual convictions at that time, and the question was powerful because I had to think: do I really believe actually these things I'm saying? And I think a lot of young people are faced with that question, one way or another, when they were raised in some kind of a religious environment, especially Christian, and then they think as a young person, no, I guess I don't really believe that stuff. Why am I talking about? And that's what happened to me. I told her, I guess I don't really believe that. And then I went off on a whole different directive. And this was true of my whole family. And it was my youngest brother, or my younger brother, there are 5 kids in our family, who had become a Christian during the Jesus movement in 1970 or 71. And then, of course, now he's full of spiritual life and he's overflowing with Jesus. And of course, he was compelled to want to see his family become Christian as well. And so this is what compelled him to become to talk with me like he did. And over a few years, in a lot of crazy circumstances, that I came around to become a Christian. Yeah. So that's kind of that backdrop there. So with that clarification, what was your question again?
The question was, but why are you still a Christian today?
Well, the reason I became a Christian, and to me, this is very important, and I do emphasize this when I talk with other people or our audiences. I did not become a Christian because I like Christianity. And there's a whole lot of people who talk about the religious views that, well, I like Buddhism, or I like Hinduism, or I like New Age, or I like. This is not the question you need to be asking. I became a Christian not because I like it. There's a lot of times I don't like it, Christianity. Not because it would fill emotional need or there was a promise that I'd be happy or all these kinds of things that people kind of lay out there as inducements. I became a Christian because I was convinced it was true, that it really reflected reality, the way the world actually was. And so the fact that was a factor in I needed to find out what was true and then embrace that and live according to the truth. Look, you go to a doctor and the doctor tells you, you got cancer, you're going to die in 6 months unless you get this radical treatment. It would be silly to say to the doctor, you're mean. I don't like that diagnosis. You're being mean to me because you told me something I don't wanna hear. I'm gonna go find somebody else who's gonna tell me what I wanna hear. You don't want a nice doctor in that sense. It's nice if he's nice, but that's not why you go to a doctor to get stroked. You go to a doctor to get an accurate diagnosis, and this was why I became a Christian, because it was a I came to the conviction that it was giving me an accurate diagnosis of me and an accurate characterization of the world. It was what Francis Schaeffer, I would later learn after I became a Christian, would call true truth. It's odd that you have to kind of double down on that word, isn't it, Devin? But that's the way people think of it nowadays. They think as there is a subjective truth, your truth, and when it comes to religion, that's all you can say about it. It's just your truth. They don't talk that way about gravity. Well, it's gravity's my truth, but it may not be your truth. Look at if I don't believe in gravity, I'm not going to float away. It's a feature of the external world. And in the same way, I was convinced that Christianity was a feature. The details of the Christian worldview were features of the external world. And so, I'll tell you, this has made a huge difference for me, Devin, because anybody who's been around the block a few times with Christ knows that Christianity is not easy. The Christian life is not easy. It's not always joy, 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 joy down in my heart kind of thing. It's hard, and it's because we are now in a we are strangers in a strange land. It's a book by that title by Heinlein way back when, but that's true for us. We are now strangers in a strange land, and so we don't fit here. We fit in God's kingdom, and it's not of this world, and so there's always this conflict in this world. You have tribulation. A lot of Christians don't understand that when they're wooed into Christianity with a wrong kind of message, and then they become attrition. There's an attrition rate to them. They fall away because now real living sets in, and that isn't what they expected. So for me, that didn't happen. It wasn't. It wasn't like I. Let me back up and put it this way. One person once said, "Whatever you are one with is what you are one to. Whatever you're one with is what you are one to." So if you're one with an emotional appeal to Christ, that's what you're going to be one to. Oh, this is all about my feelings. And then when the feelings dissipate, which is natural, then it's like, where's God? What happened? If you're one to an easy life with Jesus, everything's going to be wonderful. And then hardship and difficulty and suffering set in, then where's God? And off you go. But if you're one to Christianity because it's true, the more that you learn the foundation of the truth of Christianity, the stronger your convictions are going to be. And that's the way it was with me. Now, just one qualifier, and I'll let you jump in. I'm doing a lot of talking here. The one qualifier is that I wasn't like a lot of my colleagues who really did an in-depth, hard look at Christianity. J. Warner Wallace, Frank Turek, even Sean McDowell, had his doubt, and then he had to really do a deep dive, or Elise Strobel. I mean, these are all, my friends and colleagues, and all of them have this kind of profile. They did this deep dive into the intellect. There were no apologetics that were a feature in my conversion. It was just a deep conviction. This was the Holy Spirit being drawn in that Christianity was actually true. And it wasn't until after I became a believer, curiously, that I learned, I had all my questions answered, and I learned of the incredible foundation that there was of thoughtful elements that strengthened my conviction that Christianity were true. And I do remember after reading Francis Schaeffer thinking, "Oh man, and I was already a believer. But I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, this stuff really is true in a much deeper sense than I ever thought. So anyway, that's kind of how things began for me, and kind of got going.
Yeah, so you've been a Christian for around 50 years or so, sounds like.
52
Wha
now and counting.
52.
Yeah.
Wow. What do you think was the most doubt you've ever had, and what pulled you out of that situation?
The biggest doubt I ever had? Is
Yeah,
that
the
what you
most
said?
doubt, yeah.
Um, this is going to sound maybe a little unusual, but, and maybe it has to do with the what I or introductory remarks I just made, but I have never had any serious times of doubt about the truthfulness of Christianity. After I became a Christian in September '73, I actually, um joined a Christian community. I moved in. I mean, keep in mind, this is '73, all right? There was a Christian community in Westwood Village at an old fraternity house. There was about 70 people that lived there, and there were another, 20 or 30 that was off campus, but this was called the Jesus Christ Light and Power House. I know it sounds kinda corny, but we just called it the house or the Light and Power House, and it was a lot of Jesus freaks, but we had great trainers that were there that were a bunch of guys who were part of Campus Crusade who, all got mad at Bill Bright at the same time and left. And then they started this school that where they would train Christians there in an informal it wasn't a real school, like, accredited, but it didn't matter. It was where you go to learn Christianity. So it was like every day, hours and hours of Bible study with trainers that had street experience from Crusade, that had great theological credentials because almost all of them went to Dallas Seminary. Okay, so they're DTS master's degrees or DMins or whatever they had, and so I moved into this unbelievably rich environment where I immediately got attached to one individual named Craig, who discipled me for 2.5 years as part of that community. At the time, I was a student at UCLA, but I finished out that spring term of 1974, and then I left. Then I quit at UCLA, and I was just full bore, and that made the biggest difference for me, Devin. This set my spiritual trajectory so that having that intense discipleship. So I didn't have the opportunity to get out of line. Every time I might fall, I always fell against another strong Christian, because I was there in that group, the writer of Hebrews says, do not avoid the assembling of yourselves together, as is the habit of some. And so this taught me a dual message of the importance of discipleship, which has been in my blood ever since. Important of working, having other people in my life or me being a mentor directly in personal relationship with others. And over the years, I've had many, many, many discipleship groups, and now I work principally with my own team of speakers at Stand to Reason and have been aggressively discipling them for years. And when I say aggressively, I mean it's intentional, and it's personal. And we talk about a lot of things, and I help them with their speaking and their writing, because that's our craft, and with their apologetics and how they think about things, they help me too. So I'm adding that in because it does seem a little bit odd. Most Christians go through a period of doubt and struggle and then find their way back. It didn't happen to me because of the foundation that I had, the foundation that was laid for me, and the people and all kinds of incredible adventures I've had with God that were stressful and sometimes emotionally devastating for me. And I had to figure out how that fit into my walk with God, but it didn't change the truth factor. It didn't look in John chapter 6, Jesus gives his second major discourse. That's the bread of life discourse. Very important discourse because that was the time there was a change in ministry. Halfway through the ministry, he's real popular, and after that, man, he's persona non grata, basically, and he's off discipling his own disciples in foreign regions a bit, after that midpoint shift. And what Jesus was saying was stuff people couldn't handle, and eat my flesh, drink my blood, that stuff. And many of his disciples left. The text says, but then Jesus says to his 12, he said, "Are you gonna leave too?" And it wasn't like it was kinda matter of fact. He's not begging anybody to stay because he's the guy. And what Peter says is, "Where are we gonna go? You are the one who has the words of eternal life. You're the guy. that doesn't mean, I mean, I'm paraphrasing now, but reading between the lines, it doesn't mean we liked what you said any more than anybody else, but that doesn't change the truth of the matter. And that's been a huge part of my own journey with Christ, that whatever happens, it doesn't change the truth of Jesus, even if he leads you in all kinds of directions that are unusual. And by the way, Lewis, if you read Chronicles of Narnia, excuse me, he was deeply influenced by MacDonald, the fantasy writer before him, the Scottish fantasy writer. And this is a theme there. The idea that you're kind of going in one direction and it turns out, pew, 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 you're going in all these other directions. Hey, man, what's going on here? But that's true in almost all of his Chronicle of Narnia story. There's this feature of journey, 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 and hardship and difficulty and uncertainty. And then Aslan shows up right when he's needed. So this was an important detail for me in growing, Devin.
Yeah, it really reflects how significant it is to make sure you're grounded around a community of believers as you walk with Christ too.
Absolutely.
That's become, I feel like,
how does it, is this I don't know if this is a verse or just a reflection by some smart Christian, but a log burning by itself soon goes out. You got a bunch of logs together that keep each other burning, kind of deal. It's a great illustration.
Yeah, and obviously you have many years of Christianity. What do you think are the biggest topics within theology, Christianity, the Bible, anything God, that you've changed your mind about?
Well, I have matured significantly in my understanding of the sovereignty of God. That's huge. That's huge. Because if you don't have a rich understanding of the sovereignty of God, it's going to be very difficult to face the kind of challenges in life that inevitably every Christian who is walking with Christ is going to face. Read Pilgrim's Progress. It's probably the second if you take Harry Potter out of the mix now, that kind of screwed up all the statistics. But if you take Harry Potter out of the mixture, then this book, Pilgrim's Progress, is probably the second best-selling book of all time, next to the Bible. And it is a very sober characterization of the challenge of the Christian walk. And if you don't have a understanding that there is nothing that you encounter as a follower of Christ that God has not willfully, purposefully allowed for your good, no matter what it is, it's going to be very hard to navigate life with him. You have to have that confidence because it's really hard. So that's one big thing, and that's probably the biggest thing. I'm thinking some other things like I used to be a pre-trib rapture guy. I'm not that anymore. And I mean, I don't think it's worthy of discussion for now, but I simply came to the conclusion that there are only two comings of Christ. There weren't three. There was a first coming and then a second coming, and all the verses in the New Testament spoke of in the future of the second coming, which is visible, powerful, and conclusive, and that we see that in the Olivet Discourse there, Matthew 24, for example, and Jesus is there, for everyone to see. So that was one big change I made. I'm trying to think if there were. I early on I was attracted to a holiness doctrine or there was a movement in the late 19th century. It started in England, I think in Keswick, England, which is in the north in the Lake Country, and it was a complete surrender kind of movement. So it was a sanctification idea, and it was like, you become a Christian, but then you have a second experience of complete and total surrender. And when you have this surrender, then everything becomes easy. All of God, none of me was kind of the mentality. And then you've got to let go and let God. And these are terms that we hear, phrases in Christianity, but I don't, and I never could get that to work I read Hannah Hurnard and Hannah Whitehall Smith and Heinz Feet in High Places and The Christian Secret to the Happy Life. All of these wonderful, godly people, but were writing and advancing this idea that turned out I didn't think was an accurate characterization of New Testament sanctification or the teaching on it. Now I characterize it as 100% God and 100% me. In other words, even though salvation is completely by the grace of God, nothing I contribute, I do contribute to sanctification because there are all of these exhortations, for example, in the New Testament to pursue godliness. Paul says, how does he put it? Devote yourself to godliness. He says that, and et cetera, et cetera. So godliness is a means of great gain, et cetera. So that's why I tell my team this is part of discipleship. God is 100% responsible for his side of the equation, but I'm 100% responsible for mine. Now, I don't think that has any bearing on my salvation. I'm rescued and saved completely and irrevocably by God's grace. But how I grow in that is going to involve me cooperating with God in a partnership. And that's what I think the New Testament communicates. The Holy Spirit is working within me to accomplish it, but I have an effort that's really significant. So those are some of the
So
things that change. I might think of some others, but
yeah, because the last thing you said about 100% God, 100% you made me think of the free will versus predestination type of debate. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, where you stand, 'cause it sounds like, if anything, it's a mixture of both. Because I guess the 100% man, 100% you can also go not just from a salvific angle, but from a full experience of life angle too?
yeah, I don't think it's from a salvific area because it's not according to man who wills or the man who works, but God who makes the decision. This is Romans 9. It's very powerful the way Paul puts it. And he also has a lot of statements like this in Galatians. It's not up to man who wills or who works, but God who is merciful or gracious, however he puts it in Romans 9. So I'm reformed with regards to my convictions about sovereign grace. Um, that doesn't obviate free will, and a lot depends on how you characterize it. We're not machines. We make all kinds of choices. But look, there may be a circumstance as you're growing up, and in your family, you are faced with you have all kinds of experiences where you make choices, and sometimes you make bad ones and whatever. But sometimes you are in threat of some that you're at I'm just speculating here, but I'm just giving this as an example. I think people will understand. But sometimes you're facing a lethal threat, and your dad comes in and grabs you and he rescues you. You're not choosing this. He is choosing this. He is grabbing you unilaterally and he's pulling you out of harm's way. So notice there's a way, and the way of understanding how you could have a loving father who keeps you and protects you and takes you and rescues you from something that is lethal, even though you have choices that you make in your life that are meaningful and yours. Now, the only little tweak I'd make in this illustration I just offered is that that in this lethal threat scenario, let's just say there's a vehicle. You're a kid and the vehicle's coming down the road and you're right in the vehicle's way. And your dad says, "Son, look out." And you turn and say, "Dad, help me." And he comes and grabs you. So your will didn't get you saved. It was your dad's will that got you saved. You turned to him, but and this isn't always a completely accurate illustration, but I'm just saying that helps to see that God can be sovereign in salvation. And you're not a machine. And it doesn't mean that love is not possible. And I think that something like that is the way sovereign grace works. And by the way, you use this word predestination. The difficulty with that word is it's in the Bible. It's in
Yeah.
Romans 8, among other places. He has predestined us to become conformed to the image of his son. Oh, okay. Well, you got to deal with that. It's there. Now, predestination doesn't necessarily mean complete, total um, determinism. That's machine-like behavior, dominoes falling. And sometimes it's either this or that. They say, well, either God is sovereign and we're determined, or we're free and God's not sovereign, at least not sovereign in the grace area of salvation. I think it's a false dichotomy. So, I mean, just to put it as a point of clarification, I think that God certainly can be sovereign, and my reading of the text makes it unmistakable. But that doesn't mean that there's not a meaningful freedom that we express, or that we don't make choices, even with regards to salvation. God help me. I mean, Dad help me, kind of thing. We make those choices. Now, underneath, that choice is made because of something God is doing in my heart already, drawing me inexorably to Him. So I do believe in irresistible grace, but I'm just trying to give a clearer picture so people are not thinking in this strict dichotomy. Well, that's determinism. That's determinism. Well, that can't be true. So therefore, sovereign grace is not true. And there's much more nuance, I think, that can be done with that issue.
Mm. This next one feels almost borderline heretical, even asking, but if Christianity was suddenly proven false tomorrow, what part of your worldview do you think would be the hardest to rebuild?
It kind of depends what the alternate would be. So, if you said if it was proven that there is no God, and therefore Christianity is false, and Islam and Judaism and every other worldview that entails some kind of transcendent reality, well, then I would feel my response would be a sense of despair. And to some degree, this is the way I felt before I was a Christian. It was one of the things that brought me to Christ in that interim from when I was 18 to 23, because I realized if there is no God here, there is nothing. There's just me and the universe. I called it cosmic alienation. That was the language I used back then. But it's true. I am alienated from anything meaningful. Philosophers call it nihilism, and that just means nothingism. There is no meaning, there is no purpose, there is no morality, there's no good, there's no bad, or as Richard Dawkins puts it, there's no good or evil, there's just blind, pitiless indifference, is his language, which is true if there is no God. So I think that would be the strongest change. Now, if it was just that Christianity was proved to be false, and some other religion was true, well, all other religions are works-based. All of them. I don't know of any other by grace alone through faith alone kind of enterprise. That is unique about Christianity. And so then I'd have to figure out, well, maybe the Jews got it right. Maybe the Muslims got it right. I better get to work. Or even if the Hindus got it right, they got this cycle of reincarnation. I better get to work and work this karma off so I can end up better and better. I don't know. So, but that would be despairing. This is part of the problem of those religions. It's despairing. You don't know what the outcome is going to be for you. You work, 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 and that is also quite discouraging.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, because you somewhat recently were on the Diary of the CEO podcast with Alex O'Connor,
Right.
and the other gentleman, I guess, was some kind of spiritual belief that wasn't particularly religious, I don't think, but
Wait,
Alex O'Connor's
you
a
mean
guy.
Dr. K? You mean the other interviewer on the
Yes.
phone? Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. K. He was very spiritual, but he was like a Hindu, Buddhist, neuropsychologist, spiritual. So it was a
Yes.
blending of all these worlds, but it was there on the Eastern mysticism side was his conviction.
Okay. I enjoy listening to Alex O'Connor. He brought God's kind of he always talks about the divine hiddenness problem, and
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear from you, how do you interpret the so-called hiddenness of God? Why doesn't God make his existence more obvious for sincere seekers from their perspective?
Well, see, I have mixed feelings about this, Devin, because I actually listened to, I think Frank Turek he's on campus a lot. You know who Frank is, right? Okay. Um, and he does a lot of campus stuff, lot more than I've been in 92 or 93 campuses, but over 50 years. He's been on 92 campuses last month.
Yeah,
It's
he goes a
like
lot.
anyway, but so he's fielding these questions, and that question about divine hiddenness came up. And there was a young man who raised it. He said, "Look, I really want to know God. I really want to know God, but I don't see the evidence for it. That's completely compelling, and I don't know why God doesn't show himself more." So on the one hand, I have kind of a stock answer to this, but I want to say that I was very sympathetic to the earnestness that was being expressed by this young man. I mean, it's hard to argue with him, but I really want to know God. I'm looking for him. So let me just set that aside for a moment. I'm going to take him at his word, but I am also going to say, when Paul in Romans 1 talks about the physical evidence for God that's available to everyone, and he's talking about natural theology, if you want to put it that way, the evidence of God is clearer through what has been made. And it's not just clear outside of us, Paul says, but also inside of us. Now, Calvin called it the sensus divinitatus, the sense of the divine that we have inside. I actually think this is true. I see it a lot of places, even with people who don't believe. There is, in a book I wrote called Tactics, there's a tactic called the inside out tactic. And I'm just talking about things that are already built into all human beings that bear witness to the truth of God, that are inside them, and as you're talking, are going to come outside because they can't help that. A moral nature, for example. You mentioned Alex O'Connor, and Alex, he doesn't believe in, he's not a moral objectivist. He thinks moral statements are just expressions of emotion. So he doesn't believe in objective morality. But then he's complaining about the problem of suffering. Okay, Alex, please, what's wrong with suffering? He can't complain about the problem of suffering unless he's thinking that there's a moral element to suffering people. So he's smuggling morality in there. But why is he doing that? Because he's made the image of God, and that comes out. So I'm mentioning this because this is God revealing himself on the inside, and there's more ways than that. And he's revealing himself on the outside, Paul says in Romans 1. And listen, here's the key phrase: so that they are without excuse. There is enough available so that in God's mind, there is no excuse to deny God's existence. It doesn't mean there aren't unanswered questions. We were talking before the broadcast, life is messy. Christianity is messy because worldviews are messy because life is messy, so we're not going to answer all the things, but there's enough there. And so I would take, for the person who's concerned about the hiddenness of God, I would say, what about the origin of the universe, the cosmological argument? What about the obvious design everywhere? What about the morality? That is everywhere. I mean, we are moral creatures. We go through moral motions. Francis Schaeffer said, and so this is an obvious feature. These are all pointing to the existence of God. He's not hiding, and when God shows up, he leaves fingerprints. Is the way I kind of characterize it. I said, when anybody shows up in a place, they always leave almost always leave evidence that they were there. Things are moved around, whatever. You say, hey, what happened? That bowl was here, now it's over there. Somebody came in here and moved it, kind of thing. And sometimes, and they leave fingerprints. They leave evidence and sometimes they leave a note. Well, this is true about God. He's got his fingerprints are everywhere, and he's left a note. The Bible. Okay, so now, why are people acting like the hiddenness of God as if it's like the flying spaghetti monster that atheists suggest? What we're offering isn't a flying spaghetti monster. It isn't a gardener who you have no evidence for. These are kind of little memes that they use to try to show how stupid it is to believe in God. No, it's nothing like that. God's evidence is everywhere, and especially in design. People don't think about the origin of the universe so much, but design features, you know, this is why people say, "Man, look at that." They look at a nature channel. Wow, isn't Mother Nature amazing? Look at the miracle of Mother Nature. They use this language. They don't want to give credit to Father, God, so they give it to Mother Nature. But there's no mother in their view. There's no nobody. That comment is evidence, it indicates that there is profound evidence of design here. They've got to ascribe to something, and so they anthropomorphize it into Mother Nature. So I'm saying I don't think God is hidden. Now, some people might want more evidence than they have. I understand that, but that presumes that more evidence is going to make a difference. So think about this. In John chapter 11, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. He's in the tomb through 3 days. He says, "Open the tomb." No, man, that guy stinks, right? That's what they said. "We're not going to open that. He's rotting." Open the tomb. And Lazarus comes out. An amazing miracle. Amazing miracle. Some of the other rising from the dead happened like almost immediately, Talitha Kumi, little girl arise. This guy's in the tomb. He's all wrapped up. He's, he's dead. And he comes out. So this is an amazing evidence of the truth of his claims. And many people believed, but many of the leaders said, no, we've got to kill Jesus. We've got to kill Jesus. Look what he just did. We've got to kill him. That was their response to this incredible miracle. But you know what? If you turn the page to chapter 12, you're also going to see they not only plotted to kill Jesus, they plotted to kill Lazarus. Because Lazarus was living, breathing, walking, unstinky evidence that Jesus had raised him. So they had to get rid of all the evidence. Point being, some evidence is not going to be enough for anybody, even a resurrection. And Jesus said that if a person comes back from the dead, they're not going to believe, and there's an example of that. So I think my comment would be, I'm sympathetic to your concerns, but there's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of evidence. And the alternatives are a lot less intellectually appealing. I think, and very shortly here, Devin, the hiddenness of God is more of a problem for Christians than it is for non-Christians. And I not a problem that disqualifies Christianity, but it's a problem with walking with God where we have unanswered prayer and hardships and stuff we're asking God to change, and he doesn't change. And of course, this is where the idea of the sovereignty of God has to play an important role. But that, I think, is a much more substantial concern emotionally than the hiddenness of God for a non-Christian.
Yeah, I would love to get in that later because that kind of loops into something I heard you talk about on Sean McDowell's podcast about Christians and their views on God's will in their life and the kind of confusion that they put on it. They put this level of mystery trying to line up their will with God's that shouldn't really have to exist. It shouldn't be that foggy for them to do so.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to that question, there is confusion, and maybe they wonder, why isn't God showing me his will? And my simple answer is because he doesn't have a will like that for you to discover. You see, they've made the assumption, and this is going to be like, are you kidding me when I say what I'm about to say for most of your listeners? Because we have a received tradition about how decision-making works. But the foundational presumption that I think is mistaken is, and not biblical, is that God he's made all the major decisions for us and a lot of the minor ones already. He's made those decisions for us. All right. But we have to like what ministry we should be in, or who we should marry, or where we should live, or what school we should go to. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we pray to determine God's will. Show me your will regarding XYZ. Notice that the prayer presumes that he has made these kinds of decisions about our individual lives that we must discover before we can make our own decision. And that's the little equation that he's made a plan for our lives that we have to discover in order for us to do his will. And when we discover what that thing is, we found God's will for what school we go to. I think God is calling me into this ministry or whatever. But this method is not in the New Testament at all. and whatever verses people have used to justify it turn out not to have anything to do with that method read in context. So I think that this confusion you're talking about, Devin, is a result of people having a wrong understanding about how decision making works. Why hasn't God shown me who to marry? Whatever. And there are Christian teachers, I've heard them, who said, "Don't do anything unless God has told you to do it." Well, this is nowhere in Scripture. Oh, they might find David, like, 1,500 years or 1,000 years before Jesus' time and the New Covenant time. David was a very unique circumstance. He didn't check with the Lord when he's leading his nation to go into this battle or whatever. But that's not a model for us today, because nothing like that is repeated in the New Testament, and there is no indication that the disciples had to wait for God to tell them to do something before they move forward. He gave a great commission. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. I mean, there you go. Those are your marching orders, boys. Knock it out. Every once in a while, he'll do a timeout in the middle of that in a supernatural way and say, not there, here, or something. But that is very rare. It is an intrusion into the circumstance, and it's supernatural. Angels show up. Jesus shows up in a vision. There's a dream, blah, blah, blah. It's nothing like nudge, nudge, hint, hint people talk about now. So I think a lot of the frustration that Christians will have on that aspect of the so-called hiddenness of God is just a misunderstanding of New Testament teaching. Paul says, how does he do not? It's in Ephesians 5, and he's talking about being filled with the Spirit, but the implication of the passage is, don't waste time. Get going. But a lot of people are sitting around waiting for God to tell them something when God has never committed himself to tell them anything like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you cleared it up, because I've heard that so often amongst Christian peers of mine, even using it for very almost trivial things.
Mhm.
Does God want me to have a bologna sandwich for lunch or this? Or does God's will me to go to this party or that? And it's almost like
Yeah,
every single option or choice we make in life is something that must be measured with God's will. And I've always been
yeah,
so just like, that can't be how it actually is. I haven't
yeah,
seen that as like a biblical support for that to
right.
be true. But
It's
glad you cleared it up.
paralyzing. It's paralyzing for
Yes.
people, and it's
Yes.
not true. It just isn't. My final work, the working title is called "Does God Whisper?" And I've written a lot of this on this in the past, but hopefully this spring I'll get this thing going. But the simple answer is no, God doesn't whisper. He doesn't do nudge, nudge, hint, hint in a way that you've got to figure out what his hints are before you can move forward. I mean, that's goofy on its face, you
I
know?
agree. Yeah. Cool. I'm glad you cleared that up. But I also want to ask about because a lot of skeptics towards Christianity would use the whole, why is there so many religions, or why are there so many denominations amongst even Christianity? How do you respond to the reconciliation of widespread religious confusion and Christianity being true despite that?
Well, I think that this is overblown and it has parallels in the non Christian world. If the atheists were to raise that question, I think a fair question is why are there so many denominations of atheism? If atheism is true, why do atheists differ? Because they do differ. Some are materialists, some are non materialists, some are more realist, some are non moralists, realists. Some are believe in free will. Others are like Sam Harris are uh, determinists. So d- ho- if the claim is that there are differences, at least within the Christian world, and that means that Christianity as a foundational worldview is false, well, this is silly. How so? If you have Christian denominations to carry the label Christian as a descriptor of denomination means that there is something in common that all Christian denominations hold to be so. Christianity has a structure to it. Now, C.S. Lewis referred to mere Christianity, and then he said, once you settle on mere Christianity, you get in a sense, the building of Christianity. And then you walk down, there's a lot of different rooms that you have to choose from to find out which particular refinement of the basics you're going to hold to. And this is different denominations. But what he was defending and what I defend is mere Christianity. And there are groups, by the way, that identify themselves as Christian, and they don't satisfy adherence to the standard doctrines that make Christianity Christianity, as opposed to Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or whatever. There are distinctives. Okay, so what is Mormonism? They call themselves Christians. Okay, well, if they're Christians, we're not. I'm not. Because the worldviews are so radically different. It is not a refinement on Christianity, it's a repudiation of Christianity, and that's according to Joseph Smith. Now, I'm not even saying right now that Mormons are wrong and I'm right. I'm just simply saying that words have meanings, and the word Christian historically has meant a certain thing. More recently, this has gotten confused. But if it's a Christian denomination, then there are certain substantial foundational elements that are part of that. I wrote a book called The Story of Reality, and that's what I explain in that book. And there are only 5 elements that are part of that. God, truths about God, about man, about Jesus, about the work of the cross, and about what happens at the end of the age, the final resurrection to reward or judgment. Those are foundational. You depart from any one of those things, and you're welcome to, but you're not Christian. You could be Mormon, you could be Jehovah's Witness, you may be other very nice person, but you're not a Christian. So I think that this concern about all the denominations has been overblown, because the denominational distinctives have to do with small things, characteristically. Or I should say, even if they're large things, like Arminian versus Reformed, that they are small things that are still within, they're still on the reservation. They're still within the larger characterization of mere Christianity. And that's solid. Now, if somebody departs from that, then they're not a Christian. So my defenses of Christianity, and I do have my individual views about some of the other things. We've just talked about some of those, but I'm not going to say if you disagree with me on any of those things, you're off the reservation. You're in the household of faith, even though we have differences of opinion. We can't both be right, obviously, but there's a core that unites us. And that would be the response to the person. And by the way, that's just true of everyone. But Roman Catholics have different denominations in a certain sense within Catholicism. You got Vatican I crowd, and you got the Vatican II crowd, and now you've got all kinds of liberalism that's in Roman Catholicism, even coming from the Pope, that would have never been countenanced 50 years ago. Okay, I'm not putting down Roman Catholics. I'm just saying, there you go. You have the same thing in Mormonism, and you have the same thing in atheism. They don't call them denominations. You have the differences in Darwinism. You have the Darwinist fundamentals like Richard Dawkins, and then you have the punctuated equilibrium guys like Stephen Jay Gould, for example. These are very different characterizations, and they fought tooth and nail with each other when they're on the inside. But when the outsiders come in, they're joined together and they fight against the intelligent design crowd. Every group has differences. Just because there are differences doesn't mean their foundational understanding is false. That has to be assessed on its own merits.
Okay. And obviously, the biggest question that everyone always has for Christian apologists is typically the whole, why does God allow suffering? In your experience, since I know you've been asked that thousands of times, what do you think is the most satisfying answer to that question?
Well, there's a couple of elements to this, Devin, and a person like Alex O'Connor, who brought that issue up on Diary of a CEO, DOAC, a few months ago for me, um, they're they're offering it as a kind of internal contradiction that you can't believe in a God who allows this kind of suffering. Okay. Now, that's one piece of it. All right. So let me just address that. It's not quite what you asked, but it is a foundational piece because it comes up a lot. And in this case, his Alex's protestations notwithstanding, he was smuggling morality into that equation. If suffering has no moral consequence whatsoever and it just feels bad, but it doesn't mean it feels unpleasant, but that doesn't mean it's bad in a moral sense, then this question has no bearing on whether or not God exists. It has to have a moral element to it to be an argument against God. But the problem is, and is that you can't have any morality without the existence of God to begin with. Now, there's some complexity there. I don't have time probably to get into right now. But if there is no God, let me back up. If there is evil in the world, which is implicit in the complaint about suffering, then there are moral rules or codes that have been broken. Okay, there are moral rules. They've been broken. There are moral rules. Therefore, there has to be a moral rule maker, so to speak. If you live in a country, if you're in Germany on the Autobahn, about the Autobahn, that superhighway. Oh, really? Okay. Well, my question is, can you break the speed limit on the Autobahn? Well, the answer is no, because there are no speed limits in the Autobahn. It's a highway in Germany. You can go as fast as you want. Okay, so you can't break a law that doesn't exist is the point there. Okay, if somebody's complaining about the evil of suffering, that means some law has been broken. It's bad. Okay, that means there must be a law. But how do you have a law without a lawgiver? You don't have any speed limits without governments to impose them, establish them, and impose them. So the fact that there is an objection about the immorality, essentially, of suffering implies that there is a moral law that has to be accounted for. Where did that law come from? It can't just come from nowhere, or else we have no obligation to obey it. So it turns out, simply put, that, and there's a lot more that could be said about this. I've written on our website, str.org, I wrote a book called Street Smarts that has a lot more detail in there about this. Can we be good without God is the chapter title. In any event, if there is evil in the world, this is powerful evidence that there is a God. So I don't accept that the suffering issue is evidence against God. Now, then the question becomes, all right, well, then why would God allow suffering? Why would God allow? And this is your initial question. Now the question of God is no longer, in my view, at this point, a question. If there is bad things happening, there's got to be a God to define that. And if that God is not good, then the rules that he makes aren't good either. But that's what we're aware of. So there's got to be a good God. This is the way that argument cashes out. All right. Okay, given a good God who is powerful, why would there be so much suffering in the world? And the answers are varied. And this giving an answer to this is called a theodicy. Some people might have heard that word, theodicy. So a theodicy is an attempt to explain the reasons why God would have allowed evil. And some people will have a free will theodicy, for example. Another one is a very popular, and I think these all have merit in some level, but they are conjectures to some degree. Another real important one is a soul-making theodicy, and that is God allows evil in the world to have a salutary effect on the development of our souls. So let me ask you a question here, Devin. Would you say that that long suffering is a virtue, if you have the virtue of long suffering?
Is that the virtue of long suffering?
Yeah. The Bible talks about this thing, long suffering, perseverance under suffering, the ability to persevere under suffering.
Yes.
But that's a virtue. But do you realize that's a virtue you could never have unless there was suffering? You can never develop the virtue of long suffering unless there's suffering. How about is being a forgiving person a virtue?
Yes.
Yeah, but you could never have that virtue unless there was something to forgive, fallen world, and on and on. Those are two illustrations. So there are certain characteristics of human virtuous development that could never happen unless we were in a fallen world. And certainly this is very obvious in the Christian life, all right? Um, the Peter says in First Peter, 3 or somewhere there, he says, "Why are you so surprised at this fiery ordeal among you, as if something strange were happening to you? But in so far as you are persecuted or you share the sufferings of Christ," I can't remember his exact words, "blessed are you because the Spirit of grace and glory rests upon you." So oh, yeah, this is a bad thing happening, but here's the good thing that God is doing as a result. Okay. And so there is this interplay between the anguish of the suffering and the production of virtuous qualities in our lives that, in my view, from a divine perspective, makes the suffering worth it. The payoff is more than the suffering cost. It's building something that God wants to build. And by the way, this notion of the soul making is many, many, many places in Scripture that talk about this. Paul says in Romans 8, he said, "I do not count the sufferings of this life to bear any comparison to the glories that are going to follow." And most famously, maybe, and Lewis made a phrase from this verse, famous essay he wrote, is 2 Corinthians 4 and what's 15, 17 and 18. And what that passage says is, here's the way Paul characterizes our suffering on this earth. He says, "For momentary light affliction." Now, Paul didn't experience, from our perspective, momentary or light affliction. He had it bad, you know. But he says, it's a comparison. Momentary light affliction, and what's the verb here, is producing an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And what he wants us to do is to look at the sufferings we're experiencing in this life as Christians. This isn't true of non-Christians. But as Christians, it is something that God is using. It is the element God is using to bring about an effect in the future, which Paul calls the weight of glory. And that was the title of the essay by C.S. Lewis, Weight of Glory. One causes the other. And without the one, you don't get the other. That's God's economy. And so I know this verse, 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18. And the way it ends is, as we look not as the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen, for the things that are seen are perishing, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Now, why do I know that verse? Because, man, I go back there a lot as I look at the hardships of my own life. I said, okay, Greg, this is producing that. This is producing that. So that's a kind of thing that when I think about suffering, and there's more that could be said about this, but the suffering for the Christian, God has promised in Romans 8 to use it. Now, this is where a famous promise that people don't read the entire thing, and they often misquote it. For all things work for good. For good. That's what they say. Well, everything works for good. No, that's what it says. It says God causes all things to work for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Now, those are kind of synonymous because the ones who love him, the one who are called, and he describes that a little bit later. For those whom he foreknew, and that's a synonym for election. It's not saying what he knows is going to happen before, and he knows not the action, but the people. Those whom he foreknew, he predestined, there's that word, to become conformed to the image of his son. Okay, that whole thing taken together shows that God is taking action on the lives of Christians to use everything to make them more like Jesus, which is his goal for our lives. And those are very comforting words for me, and I hope to many others, and these notions are repeated frequently in Scripture. So the suffering that we experience in a fallen world is redeemable for the believer, for the goodness of the believer.
Mm, that's very well said. Also, are you good on time? I don't wanna
Yeah,
disrespect your time.
I'm good.
You're good,
This
okay.
is fun. and important, so we can go longer. I'm okay. I just have an article to write, and I'm behind in my deadline, but, I'll make it up. No worries.
Cool, cool, good to hear. What is the hardest conversation you've ever had in your ministry, and what did it teach you about persuasion and grace?
Um, well, the hardest conversation I have ever had, let me just think. One stands out. It was a debate I had at either Oregon State or University of Oregon. I get them mixed up, but it was in Oregon, and it was a debate on the issue of relativism. Now, it was only hard because my interlocutor, let's say that fancy word instead of opponent, my enemy. No, the guy on the other side, he was not cooperative. He was very, he wasn't pleasant, and they have a proctor for the debate, and it's always a retired professor, and this guy's sitting there falling asleep, and he's not holding the other guy's feet to the fire to play properly in the debate. It just got me so angry that I had the hardest time keeping my cool in front of an audience, which is really important. So that was the hardest time that I think I've ever had. That I was the angriest. Let's just put it that way. That was the hardest to keep my cool without yelling at this guy. So, but that was a different kind of hard because on the merits, there was nothing it wasn't like he's putting forth hard questions. I will say that this recent discussion I had with Alex O'Connor, who right now is probably the best known atheist in the world, he's only 26. He's brilliant. And he's very clever, very fast on his feet, and he does this all the time. And so when I'm 5 hours and 15 minutes across the table from Alex O'Connor, and he's pushing back really hard on me, only 3 hours and 23 minutes or so made it into the final cut. But this is a long haul, and he pushed back really hard on a number of issues. And I found that I had to really be careful. He was a steamroller. Anybody who's read Tactics knows what that is. An interrupter, push, push, push. You can't get your answer out before he's jumping in and interrupting. He was doing a bit of that. He was raising challenges to Christianity and the most uncharitable way, I thought, in some cases. Now, he's a calm, even-handed kind of guy, and most of the time he's pretty nice to Christians. I'm not a fan of his show, but guys who have told me that they've listened a lot to him said when they listened to this interview, this is the toughest or most aggressive they've ever seen him with a Christian. And the irony is that, sorry, the things that he was advancing against my view, and he was in a worse position with regards to those issues than me, you know. So, I mean, if I'd had time to develop some of the rejoinders to what he has said, it would have made him look really bad. His view looked bad is the point. But in any event, when you're in a tough situation, you got 8 cameras rolling, 8 cameras, and this is going out to a lot of people, and there are 12 million people who have subscribed to this channel, and so there's a lot at stake, and the pressure's on, and you've got an opponent that's pretty aggressive, and you got the kind of fog of war kind of situation. After we were done, you think, "Oh, I wish I would have said this, or wish I would have said that." But that required a tremendous amount of concentration in dealing with Alex so that I could rebut or parry at least the challenges he was making and offer a characterization of the Christian worldview that didn't look silly in the way that he was trying to make it look. So that was probably one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. Now thinking about this, there was one other conversation I had that was really, really hard. It was media one. Those are the hardest. Pardon me. Those are the hardest because so much is at stake. People are listening. This was a BBC interview across the pond, and millions upon millions upon millions were listening to this interview. The interviewer was their toughest interview. I can't remember her name. I'd have to look it up, but it was on the issue of abortion, and she was a fierce pro-abortion person, and she was really coming at me really hard. And I remember I was in a broadcast studio at that time, And I remember I had notes and stuff that I was gonna use, but I never looked at my notes. It was almost like I did the whole interview with my eyes closed because I was so focused on every syllable. I had to deal with this very aggressive person and, and who was asking who was characterizing my view in the most uncharitable way imaginable. And, that was a very, very hard interview. And I think I acquitted myself well. I didn't back down. I didn't get mean to her, nasty, or anything like that. But nevertheless, that was a tough one. So it's the more public interviews that are more challenging because so much more is at stake. When I'm one on one with people, it's not. It might be challenging, but it feels different, and so it doesn't feel so hard. And generally, I'm more relaxed.
Yeah, and when you spend 5 hours with someone like that, or multiple people like the Dire CEO interview, do you guys go out to, like, Red Robin or Bob Evans afterwards? How's that look?
Well, in this case, this is downtown New York. We were like 8 blocks from the Empire State Building, and, but as it turned out, when we were done, I invited Alex O'Connor to dinner. And he had to get right on an airplane flying back to London because the next morning he had another one of these things to do. Then he said, "Look, and I don't do these things all the time, but this is on my schedule." So he indicated he would have wanted to connect if we could, and he said, "I'm in LA on occasion, so maybe we can do something when I get in LA where I live." So we'll see, but generally, in a situation like that, that hasn't been the case, but in his case, I would have liked to have met with him, because I think the conversation would have been more well, I wanna say more genial, though I don't think he was mean, but he was on his marks, okay? And I think it went during the filming, and I think he would have been more relaxed, and we'd have a different quality of conversation if it was just over dinner, but he wasn't able to do that, so
Yeah, and I mean, he's so interesting because sometimes with him, I'm thinking, well, he's only 26. C.S. Lewis didn't come towards even theism until he was 30. Or I guess you can compare it to maybe Jesus didn't really start his missionary journey with his ministry until he was age 30. So I'm always
yeah.
thinking, well, I feel like a guy like Alex O'Connor, I can so see Christ working through and making him, I guess, the modern version of it. Maybe that's crazy, I don't know. But sometimes the way I see him carry himself amongst Christians, going and he, goes to seminary, has all these debates and conversations with the opposite side, and now he's more subscribing to an agnostic worldview versus just atheist. I'm like, slowly but surely, maybe he is heading that direction, I don't know.
Yeah, well, he I think he is quite transparent about his, ideas about stuff, and I saw an interaction with him and Sam Harris, one of the so-called new atheists, one of the 2 surviving of the 4, and Sam was kinda taking him to task for being too conciliatory to theists, especially Christians, and so he did an interview also with, uh, John Lennox, and was very gracious to John Lennox, and was very amicable. It was there at Oxford or maybe Cambridge, but it was, so he has an interesting transparency. He is mystified by consciousness, and he is kind of, toying with panpsychism, um, uh, uh, as an alternative. I don't know why he doesn't, and I would ask him this: Why aren't you going to mind body dualism if you're mystified by? Why don't you have a soul and a body? What's wrong with that?" "Oh, well, that's a part of Christianity. Panpsychism is outside of it." So I don't know about that, but he does have, and he just recently did something. Why I'm looking at Christianity in a more favorable light, and he said that something happened in the first century there around 33 AD. Something happened. This Jesus guy did something because there was an explosion of world change following that, like it never happened with anybody else. What happened? So these are I think these are fair things, but then then you wonder, is that going to make a difference? Is he getting closer genuinely to bending his knee? I don't know. I had heard these things about Alex in particular, I think this is more true of Alex than anyone else who's operating as a public atheist right now. All of those guys are way at the extreme, in my view. Very hostile, very combative. There's no way that Christianity is true. Um, those are people who are kind of working in the business of atheism. Now, there are significant people that were atheists. Tom Holland, who is the British, I think he was an atheist, a British historian, Alan Standage, who is a physicist, who became a Christian on the way to the evidence. So some of these people made radical changes. Hiri Ossi Ali, I never say her name right, but she's a Muslim woman. Do you know
Yeah,
how to say her
yeah,
name?
yeah.
Yeah.
If I tried, it'd be worse than the Koukl incident.
That's that was good. So she went from Islam to atheism and now to Christianity. So you do see changes on a high level. What you don't see is high level atheists that are in the business of atheism, like a Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, et cetera, et cetera. You don't see them changing their mind. And so Alex is the only one that I can see that seems to be giving, maybe wondering. All right. Now, I'd heard about this before I was on with him. Then when I was on with him, I thought, no way, this guy's not getting any closer at all. But that was the combative environment of an interview like that. Since then, he's made more comments. He said, "I'm not a Christian. People think I'm maybe getting close. I'm not a Christian, but I think Christianity is more plausible now than I used to think." And he used to be kind of the kind of new atheist ilk, and he's many times confessed, "Oh, I'm tired of that. That's no way." So that doesn't mean he's changed his atheism, but there's a different posture he has. So who knows? God knows. And
Yeah,
certainly, but there are fabulous examples historically. I mean, Saul of Tarsus for one, and Nebuchadnezzar biblically, both of them. And then even modern day examples where people just turned on a dime. Beckett Cook, a guy was deeply embedded in the film industry, knew everybody, and he was homosexual, and he walked into a church gay, and he walked out of the church completely repudiating his lifestyle. He got like miraculously saved in that one session. And now he's an apologist regarding that issue for Christianity and et cetera. But so it does happen. Who knows? We'll see what happens with people should pray for him, and we'll see what God does.
yeah. And I'm always interested as well to hear who is someone else you'd be, I guess, on like a global scale, world stage, kind of like an outside Connor. Would you be interested to talk to about Christ?
Uh, I read this question this morning because it was in the material you sent me, and I had an idea, and I can't remember. I should have wrote it down. There are times when I'll see a well-known personality, who seems to be a thoughtful person, uh, and I think, I would like to sit down and just have a even-handed conversation. Emma Thompson came to mind. I mean, she's an actress,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Ronnie.
and she always struck me as a thoughtful and a generous individual, and she was actually quite close to Alan Rickman, who died of cancer. Who I also liked that I like him both as an actor, and it's always sad, when I see somebody you like and then just is gone, and you know that they weren't a believer. But she was very tender, and they were close friends together, and anyway, so there's something about her that's appealing to me. When I see somebody I think is not a hostile person, I might be able to have a conversation with them. And so I have these little fantasies of having them listen to the show and contact me and let's have a dinner or something and let's talk. So, but maybe in a little bit, that person that I thought of earlier would come to mind. But it's something like that. I would want to talk to a leveraged individual, not just anybody, but somebody that I could have a fair conversation, a thoughtful conversation with, that is very powerfully placed. Now, not for the sake of, me waving my flag about knowing somebody important, but because of the influence that that person would have if they changed something,
Yes. Yeah.
okay? And, and there's a bunch of people that have come forward lately, and you can see this on YouTube, um, people who, um celebrities who risked all for Jesus. Well, then they got Matthew McConaughey on there. And Matthew McConaughey's not a Christian. All right. You listen to the things he says, he's not a believer. He likes Jesus. And Jim Carrey. I don't know what to think about Jim Carrey, but he's another guy on there. And there's a number of people like this that are all, really talk about Jesus, but have no understanding of
Yeah.
really what's entailed. Now, by comparison, you have a guy like Kirk Cameron, who I've known for quite a number of years, and he used to live just down the road from me, and we get together for dinner and odds and ends, and his wife is in our home and blah blah blah. Anyway, Candace, or not Candace, that's a different person, Kirk and Chelsea. Okay, so, but he's a true blue. He's a totally true blue. And there's no nonsense about his own convictions and living for Christ and sacrificed, arguably a much more profitable career for being very visible about Christ. So my interest would be in talking with somebody like that who has a very leveraged position, and then having them have a genuine conversion. A genuine conversion.
Yeah. Who would be cool to see you talk to, honestly, would be, a gentleman named Muhammad Hijab. He's
Who is
kinda
it?
like Muhammad Hijab. He's probably the biggest Islam apologist in the world, I'd probably say.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be out of my league a little bit in terms of the material, but it's like, David Wood or maybe Abdul Murray or somebody
Sure.
else
Yeah.
that they probably debated him already, and even Alan Schleman on our own team would be better off, but but, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Who do you think the smartest person you ever debated was?
Uh, well, smarts come in 2 categories. That's why I'm pausing. You can have a really smart person who makes really dumb mistakes in thinking when it comes to spiritual things. And I think this is all of the new atheists, all of them. Sam Harris is brilliant, but he's an atheist and he's a determinist. Now, determinist means that there's no free will. He's not making any choices at all. Everything this results in machine-like behavior. Machines are just reacting to whatever input and output, whatever, But there he is arguing for atheism and even arguing for determinism, which presumes we have the ability to think freely to make a decision. It's totally inconsistent. Anyway, but I would say 2 people come to mind. One is Dennis Prager. Do you know who Dennis Prager is? Well, I've known Dennis since the '80s, and we have been good friends for a long time. I just saw him 2 months ago in the hospital where he's rehabbing for his accident a year ago, and, he's basically a quadriplegic at the moment. In fact, I was in his hospital room when we received the news that, Charlie Kirk had died, and, I was standing next to Dennis's bed, and, I was tough. Charlie had been in the same room 2 weeks before. Dennis is brilliant, just brilliant, and one of the most engaging interlocutors you'd ever have. And I've done radio with him for years back, and we've been friends, had dinner many times together, and with his wife Susan. Anyway, he's amazing. I don't think he's close to becoming a Christian either. I thought that maybe this accident would be a Damascus Road kind of experience, but it doesn't appear to have been, in any event. And I would say that Alex O'Connor, I honestly, you were talking about non-believers, right? Most brilliant non-believers,
Oh,
right?
it can be both, yeah, either one.
Well, Alex O'Connor is very impressive.
Yeah.
He's just, eh, I kind of feel, oh, it's wasted ultimately, but God's not finished with him yet, right? Or Dennis, arguably, but those 2 are the 2 brightest people that I've ever engaged in, I think, in practical brightness. I debated Michael Shermer for 3 hours on on national radio, I'm not impressed with Michael. He's got a PhD in sociology. He's written lots of books. I got it on my bookshelf back here, and but he's he's not a slacker, but he doesn't use his intellect well. So, and on our side, J.P. Moreland was one of the biggest influences in my life. He's a philosopher. He's one of my mentors. I've known William Lane Craig for many years. We've worked together on lots of stuff. We disagree on both of these guys. I disagree with on certain issues very strongly, but even so, Bill is fabulous. I listen to his podcast just to stay mentally sharp. And I took a master's degree in philosophy under JP. So those guys are just amazing, And these are people that all four of these are people that I've had personal interaction with in a significant fashion. So these are the ones that I would kind of toss out there from both sides of the track, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And if you could see one person in your life come to Christ right now, who would you pick?
My daughter.
How many daughters do you have?
2.
And one's a Christian, one is not?
Correct. They were both raised with a strong Christian education, classical Christian school, Trivium school. But then when my eldest got out of grade school into high school, that was a big shift for her. And so she doesn't identify as a Christian at all now. But people ask me about this relationship, and the way I characterize it now, I'm just saying, I think this is something for people to think about who may be in a similar circumstance. The goal I have right now is not to convince my daughter of my view; it's to convince her of my love, and that's the track I'm on right now.
How's that been going?
Improving. It's been going well. The relationship is improving a lot. I don't know what's happening on the spiritual side. I don't know. But, and my younger daughter's on a very good spiritual trajectory.
Mm.
So, knows the Lord, Christian friends, went to Christian schools, going to Christian college. And, so, we'll see.
Yeah, I'll be praying for that for you.
Thank you.
Of
Thank you.
course.
That's sweet. Yeah, that's it. The simple answer there.
What predictions do you have for the, I guess, future of Christianity in terms of the next 20 to 30 years? Do you think it's gonna be on the decline, reshaping, reviving? How do you think that would look?
Yeah, that's tough to say. Devin, I'm not a prognosticator. I'm not a prophet or a prophet's son. But I became a Christian 52 years ago during the Jesus movement. It was an incredible surge of the spirit. And something else is happening right now. I hesitate to call it a revival. Some people are doing that. But in the last 2 years, something's been stirring. And Justin Brierley, I don't know if you know Justin, came from what unbelievable broadcast there in London, wrote a book called The Remarkable Rebirth and Belief in God. And he's tracking the change of a lot of the cognoscenti of the world, the smart people, and how they're changing. And Tom Holland was an example. You even have somebody like, I always have a hard time downloading his name. He's in the news a lot now. He's a conservative thinker, Brit, who identifies Andrew
Wilson?
Murray. His last name is Murray. Murray.
Oh,
anyway,
Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray. Thank you. Yeah, Andrew Murray's an ancient Christian whatever guy. Douglas Murray. Yeah. So Douglas Murray would call himself he's a Christian atheist. So his convictions are atheist, but all his values are Christian, which has got to create a lot of cognitive dissonance for him because his worldview can't supply what's really important for him. And so I don't know where he's going, if anywhere, but that's interesting. Okay. And so what Justin was doing is looking at this trend, and I think that is a big trend. Then a year or so ago, you have Stephen Meyer of Discovery Institute and Amazing Rebirth of the title of it. I'm looking for it now. Something like The Amazing Rebirth of the Belief in God, or The Resurgence, or whatever that title is, but a fabulous book, and he's got a lot of airtime. But he was on Rogan for 3 hours and made this incredible impact on Rogan, Joe Rogan. Then a few months later, Wes Huff was on, and Wes just kind of came out of nowhere, and he's a remarkable guy, just a remarkable guy. He ties with us at Stand to Reason, and actually Tim Barnett, one of our speakers, is one of his best friends. They're both in Ontario, and Toronto, actually, in that area. But he's just exploded and doing remarkable work. And when he was on Rogan, he got 7.5 million views. I mean, that was like a month ago I checked it, and it's still increasing. And now he's going all over the place. So, wow. And Rogan is going to church. So, wow. Oh, that's the guy. If I had anybody I could talk
Oh, it was
to,
Rogan?
Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
That
that's a
was the
good one.
name I thought of. But, I mean, who's more leveraged than Rogan, right? So I would love to participate in that continuing that journey that he's on, apparently. And because I know both those other guys, and I just love to I'd love to be on a show and talk to him for 3.5 hours, and that's linear, that's one-on-one, not like Doak, where there are four of us, and then things get out of hand that goes another direction. I got nothing to say, and I'm sitting there like a bump on the log. But in Rogan, that would be that would be cool. I would love, and he's not hostile. So anyway, I'm just noting here in answer to your question, all these things happening, okay, and there's Bible sales are going through the roof. And anecdotally, as I'm going to different churches around the country, I'm asking, "What is happening with you guys?" And they said, "Man, our church is filling up. We've got our youth group is teaming with young people looking for answers." And I think what they're seeing more and more is that the secular view of reality is too empty. There's nothing there. The you do you doesn't work for bringing ultimate satisfaction, and that's kind of the reigning relativistic theme of the culture right now. And when Charlie Kirk got killed, that was kind of like a force multiplier of something that was already happening, and that it just added so much juice to everything. And I noticed when Bill Craig sent out when we send out our end of year stuff, like it's right now, okay, what is our theme? What are we saying to our donors? We're saying something's happening. And Stand to Reason is well positioned, and you're well positioned to make a difference in this harvest that seems to be presenting itself. The fields are white for harvest. Then I got William Lane Craig's mailer. He's got the same theme because he's seeing the same thing. I saw Bill just a few weeks ago, and we were. I don't know if we talked about this or not, but he's seeing the same. Then I got another mailer from some other place. They're saying, "Man, something's going on here." So a lot of people are seeing a surge of spiritual interest. What's the durability? I don't know, but it's certainly been surging for 2 years, and it's surging at high levels, it's not just grassroots, it's at high levels too, and that's unique. And, I mean, think of it at the memorial for Charlie Kirk. Holy camole, everybody was talking about Jesus. And Frank Turek, they had all these religious people talking about Jesus, and then Frank was the last one before the politicians, and Frank gave this incredible appeal. Charlie Kirk is in heaven not because he's a good dad or a good patriot or a good husband or that he gave his life for Jesus Christ. He's in heaven because Jesus Christ gave his life for Charlie Kirk. I mean, that would talk about a mic drop moment. Holy come on. Anyway, that was great. I was like sobbing. It was so my buddy, and I was so proud of him. And then right after that, all the politicians got up, and the same theme continued. Boom, 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 one after another, after another, after another. All these high-ranking cabinet members, et cetera, are all saying the same thing. There are only two clunkers in the crowd as far on the spiritual line, as in my view, and they both had the same last name. Just saying. But that was just not a reflection of the politics, but on the spiritual commentary of that day. So many people speaking to millions and millions and millions of people are proclaiming Christ and him crucified. Wow, something's going on. So
Amen.
we'll see, right?
Yeah, yeah. 2 more questions, and then we can get you out of here, Greg. So, one question, or both these questions are questions we always ask our guests because I just think they're so fascinating.
Okay.
Have you ever experienced a paranormal or supernatural encounter?
Probably in the sense that you're describing it, I have to say no. However, there were all kinds of crazy things. You could call them coincidences. Some people would be willing to call them coincidences because they were not paranormal or supernatural in maybe a more classic sense of the word. But they were things that happened that it was clearly God's hand. And, none of those had to do with some relationships when I was very first a Christian, the first couple years, and, another one happened when in 1976 when I was touring Europe, on a missions trip, and we spent 5.5 weeks of the 3.5 months we were there, 5.5 weeks behind the Iron Curtain, when there was an Iron Curtain, and we were in not Budapest, we were in, Romania, Bucharest. And we were supposed to meet with some Christians there. That was remember, things are not easy for Christians in those countries, and I had lost the location. I was supposed to keep track of the location of this person. We gotta be careful of keeping this information because if you're caught with it, it could be bad for the person you're going to see. Well, I lost it. I hid it somewhere, and I hid it so good I couldn't find it. So now we got the map of Bucharest. That's the capital of the country in front of us, and we're trying to think of where could this place be? It was like a seminary. And, so, we just broke the city down. It was just, close your eyes, put your finger on 'em, something like that. And so me and Lance, there were 4 of us, a married couple, and then Lance and I were single, and Lance and I had this one section, and we were just walking down the street, and I just happened to look. It was a kind of a residential section, like apartment buildings or something like that is the way I recall it. And I don't know, this sounds familiar. Maybe. That's why we were there, and then I saw a sidewalk along the side of the building going all the way to the alley. At the end of the sidewalk at the back of the building was a door with a plaque on it. I could see it from the street, and I just had this. I don't know how else to say it. I just had this sense that I should just walk that sidewalk and look at that sign. It was just a sense. That's all it was. And so I walked down, I looked at the sign, and that was the place. So out of all of Bucharest, we found this place. And in fact, I knocked on the door and they let me in, and there on the walls was all these pictures of these seminary people, and one of the pictures was the guy we were looking for.
Mm,
So that's pretty cool. That
wow.
was pretty cool. But, even though the rest of the time we spent behind the Iron Curtain 5.5 weeks and had a lot of crazy experiences and one bad one at the Soviet border, nevertheless, there were no miraculous things that happened that was the closest to it.
Okay.
So
And last question. One question you can ask God if you knew he would answer right here and right now, what would you
yeah.
ask?
Yeah, I thought about this morning, anticipation of our conversation. And it's a question I ask, probably others have asked too, where you have something that's really important in your life. It's objectively important. It's not something you want, but it's objectively important. It's weighty, has a lot of gravity. And you have prayed about it for a long time. I'm talking years and years and years. And the thing you're praying about is noble and virtuous. So it isn't like you're praying for something silly, or in a certain sense, outside of it certainly is within God's moral will. All right. Like when people pray for someone's salvation, that would be an example of that kind of thing. God wants people to be saved, and you're praying for that. And so, and I've had a particular thing like this in my life, and I'm talking about almost close to 20 years now of very concerted prayer daily, multiple times a day, intense. And and my question to God is, where did all those prayers go? And I've asked him this question. I haven't gotten an answer yet. Where did all those prayers go? Did those prayers make any difference? I don't see any difference in really the nature of the prayer. Doesn't mean things haven't changed a little bit, but that I didn't just pray for a little bit of change. I prayed for this thing, and sometimes that change takes place over time, but now it's been 2 decades. Where did all those prayers go? That would be the question I'd ask.
Wow, first time I heard that one. That's pretty interesting.
I
Yeah,
bet you other people have asked that question, or maybe they haven't used those words, but that's what's going through their mind. Man, what good did it do? Is probably the way what good did it do to pray all those prayers? Do these prayers make any difference whatsoever? So I should add too, Devin, that prayer is a mystery to me. I cannot figure out the calculus of prayer.
I agree.
I
Oh
mean,
my
I know I'm
gosh.
supposed to do it, but my simple approach is the first rule of prayer is to pray. That's it. Just pray. There's no magic. There's no special tricks. There are things you can do to help out at different times, but everybody, Lewis talked about this. Tim Keller talked about this. He wrote a book on prayer. Let's see, Amazing Grace guy, John Newton talked about this. Great man of prayer. Who else? I'm thinking of these greats. Who's the great Welsh preacher? All these guys, great men of prayer, but they all talked about the difficulty. I think it was Newton who said, "I am loath to go to prayer, and when I am in prayer, I am loath to stay." So Lloyd Jones is Lloyd Jones is the Welsh preacher. So these are all famous godly people, and they all reflected on the difficulty of prayer. So I think that is one of the mysterious elements of Christianity is how prayer works. And I can't make sense of some of the prayer promises or instruction, like in John 15, pray according to my will and blah, blah, blah. Okay, doesn't seem to be working for me. I don't know what that means. So, but I pray. I do pray. And it's not my strong suit. But the first rule of prayer is to pray.
Amen. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you sacrificing your time to give us some of your wisdom. Any final thoughts, pieces of advice, additional words of wisdom?
Well, Jesus said, put your hand to the plow and don't look back. And this has been a working factor or element in my life since the very beginning. Because I remember September 28th is 73 is when I became a Christian. And I remember very clearly starting the new year of 74 in tears. Hardship and difficulty and anguish and uncertainty about a lot of things, not about God, but it was just, I didn't have a very long honeymoon with God. And, but my resolve was that I was never going to quit. And, in this world, you have tribulation kind of thing. And I'm just going to keep my hand to the plow and try to be faithful. I've had falterings in moral falterings at different times and still do in some ways. And just like everybody, and I've not had any real breaches of confidence about the truth of Christianity, but I did have challenges about struggling on trusting God in some things. This is where the sovereignty of God has really become an important part of my life. But I would say, yeah, just be prepared for difficult times if you're a Christian. This is especially important to hear for younger Christians. If you're year 2, 3, 4, 5 in the Lord, if you lasted 5 years, you already know it's not easy. And it's not about, respectfully, it's not about God's wonderful plan for our lives. It's about our lives for God's wonderful plan. We're expendable to his purposes. We're in the harness with him, for him. We just keep our hand to the plow.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Greg Koukl.
Yes, sir. Devin,
Appreciate the time.
It was a great time. I really, really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Free audio post-production. Biophonic.com